Hi everybody, welcome back to the Literary Lounge. I'm your host Christopher, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics when discussing books, and that's discussing classic literature. Now, a lot of people aren't really sure where to start because classic literature can be much more wordy, it can be harder to understand, uses outdated language often. So today I wanted to provide a good starting point for readers of different types of genres, just to get you a rough guide on how you might be able to get in to start reading classics. And if classics aren't your thing, you just find that even if you try these or try others and it just doesn't work out for you, that's fine. But I just wanted to give you a couple of my favorites that you could possibly get started with to get you interested or more ready to read classics. And one of my favorites is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, of course, Jane Austen's one of the most popular classic writers, and Pride and Prejudice is most certainly her most famous novel. It's not actually my favorite Austen, but I definitely think it's her most accessible, and I think that especially for a first-time reader, it gets started quickly, it gets moving, and the plot is fairly straightforward, so there's not a lot of guesswork in this one as there can be in some other Austen novels. So I highly recommend getting started with Pride and Prejudice. It's a really great introduction to the warmth and wit of Jane Austen. Secondly, I have for fans of historical fiction, Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. Now, you might be familiar with the other Bronte sisters, Emily, who wrote Wuthering Heights, and Charlotte, who wrote the other famous Victorian governess novel, Jane Eyre. But Agnes Grey is one of those really underrated treasures that I think more people should be exposed to. And a little bit about the plot of Agnes Grey. Of course, I think a lot of people from the plot of Pride and Prejudice didn't explain that a whole lot, but maybe in a future episode I'll be reviewing that, so I'll get around to that then. But with Agnes Grey, it's about a governess who, at that time, that was the only respectable employment for single women. And basically, she goes to two families where the kids are absolutely awful, and she has to learn how to deal with the world and learn how to make a living for herself in a totally different time period. It's really great for fans of historical fiction, and I think this is what I like about this one too, is that it's written in a style that makes sense and it's not too complex to understand. So definitely give this one a look if you're a fan of historical fiction. Going on to my next one, which is more of a children's classic, but I think it really works well for all ages, and that's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. Why I recommend this one is that it's really whimsical, so if you're a fan of something like anime or Disney, you can really easily get into this because it's just a really creative world, and there's so much going on, so much wordplay, so many clever plot elements that I really think make this book definitely a definitive classic. So definitely a great starting point if you're looking for something fun and light to start your classics journey. Next, I have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And I think this is another one where a lot of people, like Pride and Prejudice, are fairly familiar with what happens in this book about Ebenezer Scrooge and the three ghosts that visit him on Christmas Eve to get him to change his ways from being a greedy old miser to being more loving and being more accepting of other people, and especially of Christmas and other holidays. But I think with A Christmas Carol, it's a great introduction, again, to a classic author. It's not too long, and that's the same for the other three books I mentioned. They're not super long. They're not these big behemoths that are really difficult to get into. So I really think that A Christmas Carol is a great starting point for Charles Dickens, and it's just a wonderful book regardless, even if you don't ever go on to any of the other Dickens. Next I have, for mystery fans, The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes novel. This is just one of my favorites because the later Sherlock Holmes stories are less of whodunits and more that you already know who did it, but you're just trying to see how Sherlock Holmes can trap them. This is definitely suspenseful because you don't know who did it until the very end, and it's a really well-written novel. It's got all the atmosphere, all the suspense. It's just a really wonderful novel to get started with Sherlock Holmes. So my next one is for people that really like coming-of-age stories or you really love natural descriptions, and that's Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Now, it's actually come to be regarded as more of a children's classic, but originally this was intended for all audiences, kind of like Little Women was. And there's an adaptation out on Netflix right now called Anne with an E, which is actually not really that faithful to the Ellen Montgomery original novel. So I definitely recommend giving this one a look. If you like that series and you're interested in learning more about Anne's world and about Ellen Montgomery's works in general, definitely give this one a try. And finally, as I go on to This one, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. This is perfect for fans of modern fantasy, and I just think this is a great way to get started with his writing because he's a wonderful writer, invented all these incredible languages and did incredible world building. But The Lord of the Rings is really intimidating because it's over 1,000 pages long and it's really deep. There's so much going on, so many descriptions that it becomes hard to read at times and it can be very slow. So I definitely recommend starting with The Hobbit. It's far more adventurous, it's got a lighter tone, so it's a good way to get exposed to the feel of Tolkien without having to read something that's 1,200 pages and is honestly quite dark for most of the experience. Now I do want to include a bonus book on here. I wouldn't necessarily say that this one is necessarily the best for beginners reading classics, but if you really like inspirational or Christian fiction, then I definitely recommend trying Ben-Hur by Lew Wallace at some point, because I really think this is the best Christian fiction novel ever written. It's got a great plot, it really ties in with the biblical story of Jesus really well. And a lot of people will tell you that Pilgrim's Progress is the best Christian novel ever written, but I actually think Ben-Hur is, because while Pilgrim's Progress is more of an allegory and the characters are very hard to relate to and very hard to understand at times, this one's got a really compelling plot, really human characters, and I also recommend this one as well. It definitely gets bogged down a couple chapters with random descriptions of the ancestries of horses or a random tile in the temple, and it really wasn't something that we needed to know. There's one thing that I definitely would say that's difficult to read with Lew Wallace, because he strays away from the plot quite a bit, but I definitely recommend reading this at some point if you're into Christian or inspirational fiction. So anyway, that's just a short beginning of what I think would be a great way to get started on your classics journey. If you have any others that you really like that you think would be great starting points for people getting into classic literature, you can leave them down in the comments below. Or if you know about these classics or you're interested in trying them, just send me a message or leave me a comment down below of what you think of these or if these help you get started your classics journey. So as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next episode.